Bill Pickett, African American Rodeo Cowboy by William R. Sanford and Carl R. Green. Author's Note: a rodeo is a live-action show that displays the riding and roping skills of cowboys. The first rodeos were held in Mexico. By 1888, they had spread to the United States. Modern rodeo competitions include 8 events: bareback bronc riding, saddle bronc riding, bull riding, calf roping, steer roping, team roping, barrel racing, and bulldogging. No one knows who introduced the first 7 events. That is not the case with bulldogging. Credit for inventing this dramatic way of throwing a full-grown steer belongs to an African-American cowboy named Bill Pickett. Today, Pickett is recognized as one of the Wild West's legendary cowboys. This is his true story. 1. A cowboy steals the show. By 1905, big crowds were turning out to watch rodeo cowboys do their stuff. At the Fort Worth Fat Stock Show that year, Bill Pickett thrilled fans with his bulldogging. One of the spectators was rancher Zach Miller. Zach and his brothers were planning a big Western show at their 101 ranch. He wasted no time in signing Bill for the show. Bill had seen big ranches in his native Texas. None matched the 101, which lay in north-central Oklahoma's Cherokee Strip. Thousands of cattle grazed on the 110,000 acres of sweetgrass. Bill did not know it, but he had found a home. On June 11, 1905, thousands of rodeo fans gathered in nearby Guthrie. They made their way to the ranch by buggy, wagon, and on foot. Well-dressed men and women drank soda water and talked about the upcoming show. Bulldogger Bill Pickett starred in the 1905 Fort Worth Fat Stock Show. It was here that Zach Miller hired Pickett to perform his acrobatic bulldogging for the 101 Ranch Wild West Show in Oklahoma. Around noon, rain clouds formed in the northeast. Zach's brother Joe watched the sky darken and shook his head. If the storm hit, he would have to refund the ticket money. A Ponca medicine man named Sits on a Hill stepped forward. "Big blow. Big rain. No show," he told Joe. For 5 steers, he added, he would stop the rain. Joe told Sits on a Hill that he had a deal. The medicine man danced and sang and pounded on a drum. As the clouds reached the nearby river, he screamed and shook a shell at the sky. Moments later, as if by magic, the storm veered to the east. The sun came out. A band played as Zach Miller and his brothers Joe and George led the grand parade. Behind them came 200 Native American horsemen. The aging Apache warrior Geronimo rode with them. Bill Pickett rode with the cowboys and cowgirls, who brought up the rear. Among them was cowhand Tom Mix. Mix later starred in dozens of silent films. The show kicked off with a buffalo hunt. Geronimo shot his buffalo from the back seat of a car. Ranch cooks later served barbecue hump meat to the show's special guest. Next came the trick riding and roping. Then it was Bill's turn. The announcer cried, "The next event will be Bill Pickett, the dusky demon from Texas. Bill will leap from the back of a running horse onto a running steer. He will throw the steer with his bare hands and teeth." A gate swung open and a half-ton steer dashed out of his pen. Behind him streaked a cowboy known as a hazer. It was his job to keep the steer running in a straight line. All eyes turned to the star Bulldogger. In 1905, Bill was in his mid-30s. He stood 5 feet 7 inches and weighed 145 pounds. He had a slim waist, big hands, and powerful shoulders. His eyes and skin were dark. Strong white teeth gleamed under a small mustache. On this day, he was dressed like a Mexican bullfighter. Bill urged his horse forward. Spradley quickly drew up beside the fast-moving steer. Timing his jump nicely, Bill launched himself onto the steer's back. Grabbing a horn in each hand, he dropped to the side and dug his heels into the ground. At the same time, he twisted the steer's neck upward. As the head came up, Bill sank his teeth into the tender upper lip. An instant later, he let go of the horns, flung his hands wide, and dove backward. The steer followed him down. It lay quietly on its side as the crowd cheered. Bill's bite-'em style had stopped the show. The applause brought a broad smile to Bill's weathered face. A day later, Sits on a Hill shared a secret that made Bill laugh. The medicine man had known when he started his dance that most storms turned east at the river. During his lifetime, Bill Pickett toppled more than 5,000 heads of cattle with his celebrated bite-'em style. Some of the steers he threw weighed up to half a ton. Under modern rules, a bulldogger is not allowed to bite the animal's lip. 2. A bulldogger grows up in Texas. Bill Pickett's grandmother moved to Texas in the 1850s. Unlike the state's white settlers, she did not come of her own free will. Wellborn and Alexander Barton brought her with them as one of their 52 slaves. In 1854, while the Barton wagon train was moving through Louisiana, Grandma Pickett gave birth to Bill's father. She named him Thomas Jefferson Pickett and called him Tom. The Bartons settled in central Texas near Austin. The end of the Civil War in 1865 gave Tom Pickett and the other slaves their freedom. In 1870, 16-year-old Tom married Mary Gilbert. Both Tom and Mary were mixed African American, Native American, and Anglo descent. Mary soon gave birth to a son named Willie M. Family tradition dates the birth as December 5th, 1870. Census records suggest a date in 1871. As often happens, the boy was known by more than one name. His family called him Willie. As he grew up, his friends and fans knew him as Bill. Tom moved his growing family to the outskirts of Austin. There he raised vegetables on a few rented acres. The produce found a market in the nearby city. Tom also worked at odd jobs. The hard labor did not bring in much money. In those days, an African American was lucky to make 50 cents a day. Bill was the oldest of 13 Pickett children. What he lacked in height, he made up in strength and agility. He also had a quick mind and a keen sense of humor. The one-room school he attended did not challenge him. He learned to read and write, but dropped out after the 5th grade. That was common among poor children, white and black. Their parents needed them to work in the fields. Many country schools kept their doors open only 4 or 5 months a year. When it came to horses and cattle, Bill was a fast learner. Each year, thousands of longhorn cattle moved through Austin to their way to the stockyards in Kansas. Bill learned to read cattle brands and to throw a lasso. He also proved that he had a way with horses. The risk of being kicked, bitten, or thrown by a half-wild Mustang did not worry him. As a student of cattle, young Bill knew the longhorns sometimes hid in thick brush. Even if a cowboy reached them, the brush kept him from throwing his lasso. When he was 10, Bill saw a local rancher use dogs to recover the strays. The dogs weighed 50 to 60 pounds and were part bulldog. They were trained to grab and hold a cow's upper lip in their teeth. Subdued by the pain, the longhorn would stand quietly until a cowboy arrived with a rope. In honor of the dog's breed, the technique was called bulldogging. Bill thought about what he had seen. He weighed more than a bulldog. Why couldn't he use the same method? The next time he came upon a lone calf, he grabbed it by the ears. As its head came up, he sank his teeth into its upper lip. Then he let go of the ears and flipped backward. To his delight, the calf flopped over on its side. On his way to school one day, Bill saw some cowboys branding calves. Some of the larger calves were giving them trouble. Bill told the cowboys he could hold any calf with his teeth. They laughed at what sounded like a silly boast, but agreed to let him try. After a cowboy roped and threw a calf, it was Bill's turn. He sank his teeth into the calf's upper lip, then signaled the cowboy to get on with the branding. To their surprise, the calf lay quietly as they applied the red-hot iron. When Bill released his hold, the calf shook its head and trotted off. The cowboys spread the word. Young Bill Pickett, they said, could bulldog a calf. No one guessed that the bite-'em technique would make him famous. As a young cowboy, Bill Pickett lived across the street from his uncle's house on East 2nd Street in Taylor, Texas. Bill was living in Taylor when he joined 2 of his brothers in a business called the Pickett Brothers, Broncho Busters, and Rough Riders. Modern rodeos feature many of the same events that thrilled audiences a century ago. Bulldogging, however, is the only event whose invention is credited to a single cowboy, The immortal Bill Pickett. 3. From working cowboy to a rodeo star. By the time he was 15, young Bill Pickett was a working cowboy. Chasing longhorns through the thick brush gave him plenty of chances to practice his bite 'em technique. Unable to swing a lasso, he would catch a steer by the horns. Then he would twist its head up and clamp his teeth on its lip. A moment later, the steer would be lying on the ground. Ranchers paid Bill $5 for a work week of 80 hours or more. With a week's wages, Bill could buy a good razor and a .32 caliber pistol and have nearly $3 left over. For fun and extra spending money, he entered Sunday bronc riding contests. Before long, he was riding the meanest horses around. After applauding the bone-jarring rides, the onlookers dropped coins into his hat. In the late 1880s, the Picketts moved to Taylor, Texas. The small town lay 30 miles northeast of Austin. It was in Taylor that Bill fell in love with Maggie Turner. He married her in December 1890. In the years that followed, Maggie gave birth to 9 children. 7 girls survived, but the couple's 2 sons died as infants. Bill served as deacon in a Baptist church. He held Sunday school classes and services in his home. His faith was sorely tested during the year he went blind. No one knows the cause. The blindness may have been the result of a head injury or an infection. 11 months later, Bill's sight returned as suddenly as it had vanished. The family felt its prayers had been answered. In the 1890s were busy years. Bill and his brothers went into business as the Pickett Brothers, Broncho Busters, and Rough Riders. In their ads, they promised to ride and break all wild horses with much care, catching and taming wild cattle a specialty. For 2 weeks each summer, Bill trained with the National Guard. He was a private when the Spanish-American War broke out in 1898. His unit volunteered to go to Cuba. The Army took a cavalry outfit instead. In 1900, rancher Lee Moore booked Bill into rodeos across Texas, Arizona, and Colorado. Bill enjoyed the travel and the applause. He did not like the fact that Moore kept the lion's share of the ticket money. In 1903, promoter Dave McClure gave Bill a better deal. On posters, McClure called him Dusky Demon. The nickname was vital. McClure could not bill his star as an African American. If he had done so, racial prejudice would have kept white cowboys from competing against him. Western newspapers reported Bill's feats in glowing terms. In 1904, John Dix Howe of Harper's Weekly came west to see for himself. He was awed. Howe wrote, 20,000 people watched a mere man attack a fiery, wild-eyed, and powerful steer and throw it by his teeth. When Bill fell backward with the steer's upper lip in his teeth, the animal fell on top of him. The crowd held its breath until the steer rolled over. Bill stood up, smiling and unhurt. Tom Mix was a fellow cowboy and a good friend of Bill Pickett. Both men performed in the 101 Ranch Wild West show. Mix went on to star as the hero of many Hollywood westerns. Zach Miller said that one of Bill's most dramatic exploits took place in 1905. Other accounts placed the event in 1914. Either way, the site was New York City's Madison Square Garden. Will Rogers, an expert roper who later became a famous humorist, was Bill's hazer that night. A steer burst from the chute, raced across the arena, and jumped the barrier. People screamed and scattered. The steer scrambled up the steps that led to the balcony. Bill spurred his horse and chased the steer up the steps. Rogers rode close behind, shaking out his lasso. The cowboys caught the runaway on the 3rd balcony. Bill jumped and caught the horns just as Rogers lassoed the steer's hind legs. The Bulldogger held the head steady as Roger backed his horse down the stairs. Step by step, they pulled the steer back to the arena. News of Bill's heroics spread like wildfire. The Wild West show played to sell-out crowds for the rest of its stay. 4. On tour with the 101 Ranch Show. Bill's fame was spreading. Dave McClure booked him for fairs and rodeos across the West and into Canada and Mexico. Bill performed in San Francisco soon after the Great Earthquake of 1906. The sight of the shattered city stayed with him for the rest of his life. Although Bill refused to bulldog buffalo, he did take on an elk in El Paso, Texas. Bill toppled the long-legged beast without biting its upper lip. He did not want to risk being sliced by the elk's huge antlers. In 1907, the Miller brothers signed Bill to tour with their show. The 101 Ranch Wild West show opened in Chicago. Then it moved on to the Jamestown Exposition in Virginia. Bill paid a price for the cheers he earned there. The steer he was bulldogging rolled over on him. The injuries kept him in bed for a week. That was all the inaction he could take. He was shaky and sore, but he climbed back onto Spradley for the next day's show. Of all Bill's horses, Spradley was his favorite. The first time Bill saw him, the stallion had been near death. Bill cut out a splinter and cleaned out the infection. Then he stayed with Spradley while the wound healed. When the bay coat gleamed with health again, Bill began the horse's training. Spradley was a fast learner. Onlookers swore that the horse knew what to do without being told. Bill went back to his home in Taylor when the tour ended. Maggie nursed his bruises and tried to talk him into retiring. Bill would not listen. In the spring of 1908, he jumped at the Millers' offers to a full-time job. During the season, Bill would tour with the Wild West show. For the rest of the year, he would work on the ranch. Bill signed a contract that paid him $8 a week plus room and board. Bill moved his family to the 101 Ranch. For a time, the Picketts lived in two. Bill Pickett and his horse Spradley drew big crowds wherever the 101 Ranch Wild West show spread its tent. Even though Bill risked his life each time he bulldogged a steer, the Millers paid their sire only $8 a week. Large tents. They cooked and ate in one and slept in the other. The ranch did not have a school for the girls, however. Bill solved the problem by renting a house in Ponca City, 9 miles away. At that time, only 6 African-American families lived there. Their children were not allowed to go to school with whites. The school board set up a classroom for them in a church. The show traveled through the Midwest in 1908. During one stretch, it rained for 50 straight days. Bill and Spradley slipped and skidded as they splashed after hard-running steers. Bill went back to the ranch when the long season ended in December. The Millers took the rest of the show to Mexico City. At 7,400 feet above sea level, the air was as thin as the gate receipts. No one had warned the Millers that Mexicans preferred bullfights to rodeos. Soon the show was losing $1,000 a day. To make matters worse, Joe Miller had legal problems. When an advertised performer did not appear, the show was fined 50 pesos a day. The 101 Ranch posters promised Bill Pickett, but Bill was back in Oklahoma. Joe sent for his star Bulldogger. Bill did not want to go to Mexico, but loyalty won out. He joined the show a few days later. Manolo Bienvenida and other top bullfighters watched Bill perform. Afterward, they bragged that they could bulldog too, only faster. The local papers said that biting a steer's lip was disgusting. Bill Pickett, the stories added, lacked a bulldogger's grace and courage. Joe found Bienvenida in a cafe. He said he admired the bulldog's skill, but doubted that he could bulldog a steer Pickett style. "Do it," Joe added, "and I'll give 1,000 pesos to charity." Bienvenida accepted the challenge. The time for the test came and went. Bienvenida did not show up. At last, he sent word that his contract kept him from taking foolish risks. In front of reporters, Joe accused the Bulldogger of being a coward. The affair was building toward a showdown. Weeks before the 101 Ranch Wild West show appeared in a town, advanced men pasted posters on the local barns. Touring with the show kept Bill away from his family for months at a time. 5. Showdown in the Bullring. Joe Miller offered to match Bill Pickett against a fighting bull. To sweeten the pot, he put up a purse of 5,000 pesos. The bet called for Bill to stay in the ring for 15 minutes. For 5 of those minutes, he had to be in direct contact with the bull. Miller stood to win 5,000 pesos plus all the gate receipts. If Bill lost, the Bullring would pay his funeral cost. Bullfight fans lined up to buy tickets. They wanted to see the American die in the Bullring. Only then did Miller tell Bill about the bet. Bill shrugged and said he could throw any bull in Mexico. Bienvenida and his friends chose a bull named Bonito for Bill to fight. The black bull had survived an earlier bullfight. His life had been spared because he fought bravely and well. On December 23, 1908, 25,000 fans packed the Bullring. Porfirio Diaz, the president of Mexico, took his seat to a blare of trumpets. The bullfighters carried a black coffin as they circled the ring. Bill knew the coffin was meant for him. At the last minute, the district governor tried to cancel the fight. In his ruling, he named Bonito as the bull Bill must not fight. The Bullring manager, unwilling to cancel the event, found a loophole in the order. Instead of Bonito, he matched Bill against a ferocious bull named Little Bean. It was late in the afternoon when Bill rode in on Spradley. He wore a Stetson hat, a red shirt, jeans, and boots. A team of 4 cowboys followed, ready to serve as hazers. The trumpet sounded, and Little Bean dashed into the ring. Spradley spun away as Little Bean charged. The hazers tried to drive the bull in a straight line, but he was too quick. Bill closed in and tried in vain to grab the horns. His failure told him that getting closer to the bull would risk Spradley's life. As the crowd jeered, he left the ring to ask for a change of horses. Miller was afraid the crowd would riot. He told Bill to finish the job, or we're all going to get killed. Little Bean charged again. This time, Bill would not let Spradley sidestep. Blood spurted as needle-sharp horns gored Spradley's hindquarters. Bill slid down, faced the angry bull, and locked his hands on the bloody horns. Little Bean shook his head, tossing Bill from side to side. Then the bull pawed at the stubborn Bulldogger and tried to gore him. As a last resort, he smashed him against the wall. Through it all, Bill kept his grip on the slippery horns. The bloodthirsty fans threw bottles, bricks, and boards. A well-aimed beer bottle broke 3 of Bill's ribs and opened a nasty gash. Blood trickled into his boots. Gasping for breath in the thin air, Bill lost his grip. He dropped to the ground in front of Little Bean. Bill had hung on for over 7 minutes. He had won the bet, but he was in danger of losing his life. Little Bean tried to gore the helpless Bulldogger. For once, his deadly horns missed their target. Before the Bill could charge again, a cowboy drew him off by waving a red shirt. Bill scrambled to safety as the crowd screamed its rage. More bottles and bricks rained down. The cowboys took refuge behind an iron gate. As Bill checked Spradley's wounds, an old man stepped forward. He said he was an expert in treating horn. Rodeo crowds usually cheered when Bill Pickett rode into the ring. In Mexico City, angry bullfight fans booed him for what they thought was an insult to their sport. They showered Bill with bottles and seated cushions during his life-or-death struggle with the fighting bull. Wounds. He peeled 2 red bananas and thrust the pulp deep into the wounds. 10 minutes later, Spradley was back on his feet. Thanks to the strange treatment, the wounds healed quickly. President Diaz dispatched his troops to escort the Americans to their hotel. A doctor cleaned and dressed Bill's wounds. Later, Bill explained why he had not bulldogged Little Bean. Fighting bulls, he pointed out, have short, thick necks. If I have gotten the kind of hold I usually get, he said, I would have stayed on with that bull until he starved to death. 6. Riding the show train. Bill's broken ribs healed slowly. When he could ride again, he helped work the 101 Ranch's cattle. The show took to the road again in the spring of 1910. This time the Millers had to leave their star behind. Bill was not in shape to start bulldogging again. Maggie tried to talk Bill into staying home with his family. Her nagging led to heated quarrels. Bill's daughters did not share their mother's fear that he was risking his life. The girls loved to hear him talk about his bulldogging feats. Maggie's heart softened too when she saw him mourn the death of his sons. If the boys had lived, he would have trained them to be cowboys too. The Miller Brothers 101 Ranch Real Wild West show was growing. The cast and work crews now traveled in 6 sleeper cars. Horses, mules, steer, oxen, and buffalo filled 7 livestock cars. 9 flat cars carried the tents and equipment. At each stop, the workers put up the huge show tent. It covered an area equal to 2 football fields. By September 1910, 2 of Bill's replacements had been injured. Once more, the Millers sent for Bill. He told Maggie goodbye and returned to the show. Despite his starring role, he did not expect star treatment. He bunked in one of the sleeper cars and ate in the cook tent. If a cowboy could not perform, Bill often filled in for him. Each show opened with a grand parade. Bill rode atop a wagon that carried two buffalo, Nip and Mary. Nip may have served as the model for the old buffalo nickel. The action started with trick riding and roping. Teams of riders then staged a Pony Express ride and stagecoach robbery. Native Americans danced and chanted to the rhythmic beat of the drums. A Roman rider vaulted over 4 horses and landed on the back of a 5th. Bill's bulldogging was the show's high point. Joseph, Zach, and George Miller owned the sprawling 101 Ranch near Guthrie, Oklahoma. In addition to the raising cattle, they organized a popular Wild West show. Adding Bill Pickett helped ensure the show's success. The Millers billed him as the greatest sweat and dirt cowboy that ever lived, bar none. People came prepared to cheer, and Bill gave them their money's worth. After his bottom act, the steer ropers took over. Next came square dancing on horseback and women sharpshooters. Cowboys caught a horse thief, raced a team of Russian Cossacks, and rode bucking broncos. Bill sometimes delighted the crowd by mounting one of the broncos. The show ended with a wagon train massacre staged by Cheyenne warriors. Afterward, the audience sang Home Sweet Home. In January 1910, Bill leased some land from the 101 Ranch. Because the land was close to the ranch, he could spend more time at home. Maggie took charge of the house, the garden, a cow, and a few pigs. Instead of herding cattle, Bill managed the ranch's buffalo herd. The Millers used some of the buffalo in the show. They sold the excess as breeding stock. The next 3 years slipped by quickly. Despite Maggie's pleas, Bill refused to give up his show tours. By 1912, his salary had risen to $12 a week. He put on his risky act in 22 states and 3 Canadian provinces that year. 2 near disasters marred the tour. On the way to Milwaukee, a fire burned some parade wagons. Later, a train wreck smashed the calliope and killed 5 horses. Bill escaped injury on both mishaps. Back at the ranch, Bill spent the winter breaking horses. By the spring of 1913, he was on the road again. The new show was bigger than ever. Bill kept his top billing, even though he no longer threw steers by biting their lips. The Humane Society had won its battle to outlaw the bite 'em technique. Bill thrilled crowds almost daily until the show closed in October. Then he boarded a train for New York. It was time to take his act overseas. The 101 Ranch Wild West show attracted enthusiastic crowds in small towns across America. The performers traveled from their train to the showgrounds in a grand parade. Wherever he appeared, Bill Pickett drew some of the loudest cheers. 7. Bulldogging in foreign lands. Showman Edward Arlington picked Bill to join an all-star show bound for Argentina. The group sailed on November 1st, 1913. Riding bucking broncos had not prepared Bill for the ship's rolling motion. His stomach rebelled. He was seasick for most of his 25 days at sea. In Buenos Aires, Arlington slipped his cast through customs. He could not do the same with the livestock. One of the horses had a disease called glanders. To keep the disease from spreading, inspectors put all of the show's horses to death. Arlington bought Argentine horses to replace them. Bill thanked his lucky stars that Spradley was safe at home. It was December. Buenos Aires was warmed by the southern hemisphere's summer sun. Bill thrilled the large crowds by bulldogging green Argentine steers. These steers had never been thrown before. They ran, kicked, and dodged to escape him. Bill took them down with his old bite 'em style. In a land where the rancher was king, no one charged him with cruelty. The fans loved it when Bill dressed like an Argentine cowboy. The applause inspired him to show off all his tricks. Once he had his teeth clamped on a steer's lip, he sometimes took the critter down without using his hands. On other days, he faked an injury and bulldogged with one arm in a sling. When asked why he did not use a rope, Bill gave his stock answer. "Ropes is all right for hanging people," he said, "but they gets in the way when you wants to rope a steer." Bill knew enough Spanish to talk to the Argentinians he met. No one insulted him because he was black. He ate roast beef in sidewalk cafes and smoked fine cigars. A wealthy rancher asked him to visit his spread, but Arlington refused to let him go. A second offer was easier to turn down. Bill said no to a chance to bulldog an alligator. A telegram brought Bill back to New York. Zach Miller was taking a show to England. Bill played New York for 2 weeks, then packed for the trip. The performers pitched their tents in London in April 29, 1914. Zach scheduled the show for King George V and Queen Mary. The royal couple and their guests broke 2 rules that day. First, they stayed to see the entire show. According to custom, they would have left early. Second, King George actually clapped for one of the bronc riders. Queen Mary saw the unlikely act and slapped his hands. Zach's daughter Virginia saw the slap. "I didn't think," she told her father, "that anybody could slap a king." Bill did not use his bite him style in England. Even so, English animal lovers were upset by his act. Twisting a steer's neck, they said, was horrible steer torture. The police arrested Bill and fined him $25. Zach paid the fine and arranged to have Bill fined each week. The publicity was worth every cent. The Earl of Lonsdale took Bill to visit his country home. The green English countryside reminded Bill of the Texas Hill Country. At last, the Earl's yellow Mercedes stopped in front of Lowther Castle. It was the biggest house Bill had ever seen. He said the dining hall alone was half as big as the 101 Ranch's barn. After an 8-course banquet, the men met in the smoking room. Bill held center stage with stories of his bulldogging exploits. One man wondered how someone Bill's size could throw a steer barehanded. Bill had heard the question before. "I can lift a 200-pound bag of salt over my head with one movement," he said. "People tell me that I'm pretty strong." Zach was planning a tour of Europe, just as Buffalo Bill had done in 1889. His plans fell apart when World War I broke out. On August 7th, the British Army seized the show's horses and wagons. Zach collected $80,000 for his property, but the show had to close. There was nothing to do but sail for home. The 101 Ranch Wild West show was much more than a rodeo. The Miller brothers recreated moments from Western history, including stagecoach robberies and Pony Express mail deliveries. 8. A Showbiz career winds down. Bill returned to the 101 Ranch in time to appear in a silent film. By 1915, he was back on the road with the 101 Ranch show. The Millers, however, believed that the United States would soon be drawn into World War I. They sold out at the end of the 1916 season. The United States entered the war in 1917. Bill was 47, too old to join the Army. He returned to the ranch as a working cowboy. Bulldogging was still in his blood, however. At a Sand Springs, Oklahoma rodeo in 1920, he missed his steer and landed face first. When he stood up, his face was a mass of scrapes and cuts. Bill took time out for the first aid and then asked for a second chance. With only his eyes showing through the bandages, he quickly bulldogged his steer. The crowd paid tribute to his grit by showering him with coins. Bill Pickett called the 101 Ranch his home for much of his adult life. Too old for Army during World War I, he spent the war years working as a ranch hand. The Miller brothers ran the spread from the headquarters building shown here. Later that year, Bill showed up at a rodeo in Dewey, Oklahoma. He won the first day's bulldogging with a time of 24.2 seconds. He lost his steer on the second day, but won again on the third day. Minutes later, Bill saw a wild longhorn kill one of his friends. It was a grim reminder of the risks he took. Wherever Bill went, he was billed as the inventor of rodeo bulldogging. Looking back, he guessed that he had bulldogged at least 5,000 steers. Those steers sometimes weighed as much as 1,000 pounds. In a modern rodeo, some steers weighed as little as 400 pounds. Bill's best time was 8 seconds. The modern record is 2.2 seconds. After the Dewey Roundup, Bill moved his family to Oklahoma City. He found work in the stockyards and as a mill hand. The change pleased Maggie, who liked his regular hours. Bill endured the crowded city for 3 years, but ranch life was in his blood. In 1924, he returned to the 101. Bronc rider Florence Reynolds met him there. He was a good person, kind person, she said. Everybody on the ranch liked him. A favorite ranch story featured Bill and a brown bear named Tony. Tony lived at the ranch zoo, where guests wanted to watch him guzzle soda pop. On this day, Tony was scheduled to appear in a movie that was being shot on the ranch. Bill sat in the cab of a flatbed truck, ready to drive the bear to the site. Tony, for reasons of his own, refused to climb into the truck. When treats and threats failed, a ranch hand lassoed the bear. A hard tug on the rope put Tony in motion. The bear scrambled into the truck bed, slid forward, and tumbled into the front seat. Bill grinned and put the truck in gear. With Tony wedged in beside him, he drove off to find the movie crew. Bill nearly lost more than his smile on a day in 1928. With his horse moving at a gallop, he tried to lasso a coyote. At that instant, the horse stepped on a gopher hole and flipped end over end. Bill hit the ground first. The horse landed on top of him, its neck broken. Bill struggled to pull free, but he was pinned down. I was afraid the horse would kick me, as my head was not very far from his heels, Bill said later. After a long, anxious hour, his shouts brought help. A team of railroad workers pulled him free of the dead horse. Some of the joy went out of Bill's life when Maggie died in 1929. By then his daughters had married and moved away. Alone and lonely, he lived in a small house on the ranch. Sad times had come to the Millers too. Back in 1925, they had organized a new show that was half rodeo, half circus. It featured wild animal acts as well as bucking broncos. In 1931, heavy losses forced Zach Miller to close the show. The closing hit Bill hard. The Millers were rich, weren't they? Where had all the money gone? Hollywood film crews used the 101 Ranch as a setting for a number of silent films. Bill Pickett appeared in several movies, but never became a big star. He did earn top billing in a film called The Bulldogger. 9. There'll Never Be Another Bill. The 101 Ranch's problems were beyond fixing. The country was sinking into the Great Depression. Zach, the last of the Miller brothers, lost control of the ranch. In March 1932, the new owners were selling off some of the horses. Bill went to the corral to separate Zach's personal horses from the sales herd. Bill was riding Hornet on the fateful day. His much-loved Spradley had died of old age. The first horse Bill lassoed was a wild 3-year-old chestnut. As he pulled the horse toward him, another horse ran against the rope. Bill lost his grip, and the rope went slack. The chestnut chose that moment to lunge forward. The rope went taut, and the whiplash knocked Bill off his horse. As he lay sprawled in the dirt, the frightened chestnut kicked him in the head. Bill staggered to his feet, blood dripping from his mouth and nose. Then he fainted. A visitor drove Bill to the hospital in Ponca City. Bill spent 14 days in a coma before he died on April 2, 1932. 200 friends and admirers showed up for the funeral. Zach buried his old friend on a hill that overlooked the ranch. 4 years later, the Cherokee Strip Cowpunchers Association honored its only African-American member. The members chipped in to buy a sandstone marker for the grave. The carved letters say Bill Pickett, CSCA. Will Rogers used his radio program to say goodbye to his friend. Bill Pickett never had an enemy, Rogers told his listeners. Even the steers wouldn't hurt old Bill. His warm feelings were not shared by everyone. Bill was sometimes barred from rodeos because he was African American. The 101 Ranch show also ran into racial problems. In some towns, the police would not let the show open if Bill was on the cast list. The prejudice may explain a glaring injustice. Almost 40 years passed before Bill's fellow rodeo cowboys voted him into the National Rodeo Cowboy Hall of Fame at the Western Heritage Center in Oklahoma City. In 1971, he became the Hall of Fame's 20th member and the first African American. More honors followed. In 1987, the North Fort Worth Historical Site unveiled a statue of Bill. The heroic 10-foot bronze shows Bill throwing a 1,000-pound longhorn. It stands on the lawn of the Cowtown Coliseum. In 1994, the U.S. Postal Service included Bill in its Legends of the West postage stamp set. Bill shared the honor with such Western immortals as Buffalo Bill, Wyatt Earp, and Sacagawea. No sooner had the stamps been issued than the Postal Service recalled them. The picture on the stamp, Bill's great-grandson pointed out, was that of Bill's brother Ben. A new printing in December fixed the error. Bill's hometown of Taylor, Texas, does its best to keep his memory alive. A memorial plaque stands in the park across from City Hall. The high school library displays. In 1994, Bill Pickett was honored by the United States Postal Series. His stamp appeared in a panel of 20 Legends of the West, alongside Buffalo Bill Cody, Kit Carson, and other heroes. The stamp had to be reprinted when the Postal Service learned that Bill's portrait was actually that of his brother Ben. Photos, paintings, and books that tell Bill's story. In June 1992, Taylor held its first annual Bill Pickett Parade and Trail Ride. The ride led to nearby Nowak. Legend says it was there that Bill first used his bite-'em technique. Zach Miller was ahead of the pack. On the day Bill died, he sat down and wrote a poem called Old Bill is Dead. Near the end of his tribute, he says, "Like many men in the old-time West, on any job he did his best. He left a blank that's hard to fill, for there'll never be another Bill." Bill Pickett would have felt mighty proud to be remembered so fondly. On the main square in Taylor, a Texas historical marker tells the story of Bill's rise to national celebrity. In honoring Bill Pickett, the state also recognizes the contribution other African-American cowboys made to the history of the West.